afternoon. As we're tidying up some housekeeping duties, we'll go ahead and push this boulder down the hill here and get this going. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jim with MSU Global. I'm the Director of Academic Entrepreneurship. So first off, thank you for taking time out of what I know are busy schedules to meet with us today. Appreciate it. John's almost retired, so you. I wanted to point out a couple of things just in the way of upcoming events. On Monday, December 8th from 10 to 11:30, we'll be back here again for another Fanning the Flames event, actually our December event. I know it's December right now, but this is actually our November event. It got pushed to these days because of some logistical and scheduling issues. So,
are you trying to confuse us?
Yes, we are. Yes, we most definitely are. So technically, this is the November Fanning the Flames event. In case you're keeping track, there is no punch card and there's no reward for having made all 12. But, just in case you cared. But on December 8th, we'll have some interesting folks from Extension, and also the Upper Peninsula Intermediate School District will be with us. They worked with MSU on a really interesting badge project. And so if you're curious about badges, particularly in K through 12 education, I encourage you to come back on Monday. And please tell your friends. For those of you that have friends, please tell them. I don't have any, so this is all I can do. And then before you leave today, if you have time, if you haven't, our space, MSU Global, is actually, if you make a left and then another left, you'll end up in our space.
No.
If you haven't, John,
301.
If you haven't seen Kurt Stepnitz, he's a photographer for MSU, been here a long, long time, takes some really great photos, travels with faculty all around the world, documents their projects. His photography is hanging in our space. So if you haven't had a chance, do yourself a favor, sneak through there, take a look. But he'll be back with us on December 11th from 3:30 to 5 doing what we call an innovation circle. So he'll be back here and he'll be talking about some of the work in an innovation circle. For those of you maybe that haven't attended one, are a little bit more of an intimate dialogue with the actual artist or the creative fellow. And they kind of talk about what inspires them and how that can help you in your work. And you'll see, if you have a chance to look at Kurt's photographs, you'll see that there's really some pretty inspiring things that he's been involved in over the 30-plus years that he's been here at MSU. So we hope you'll come back and join us for that. And then if you want, you can pick one of these up and we'll give you an idea of some of the other events that are coming up. Logistically, water, coffee, snacks, pop are in the back. Feel free to help yourself. Restrooms, the women's restroom is directly adjacent to the elevator, and then the men's you kind of have to do a little hook around the corner. So if you need to use the facilities during the presentation. But back to present day and what's at hand. Today, we're here to talk about telling a better research story. So welcome. We have David Paulson, who's the Associate Director of the Knight Center for Environmental Journalism, and then also Rashad Muhammad, who is an instructional technologist with our group here at MSU Global. They've been working on some really cool projects in the area of translational scholars, how to actually be able to translate what's happening in the really great research that our faculty are doing, telling compelling stories, telling better stories, getting better at sharing that information and getting that out there. So we're going to talk about that today. We're also going to share some information about a MOOClet that's been created, where if you and or students and or other faculty that you know might be interested in telling a better digital story, there's actually an online experience that you can participate in. So you'll hear more about that today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to David and Rashad. Thank you, gentlemen.
Welcome to another fun-filled installment of Fanning the Flames. I guess y'all just going to ease into things. I thank you all for taking the time to come here and listen to what we have to say. We kind of, our unit, MSU Global, kind of got interested into the concept of digital storytelling and how you can really pull out the things that really are compelling about a story and how to really focus on that. And then in exploring that, any of you attend any of our summer sessions, the little segments or dialogues that we had. So we've been exploring the different aspects of storytelling And in that process, we really wanted to find a way to apply these concepts to research. So that's kind of where we started, and that's where Dave comes into play. So I'm going to just click the first slide here. Yeah,
okay. All right, good. I hope you don't mind if I stand and talk at the same time. I think it's like a teaching thing or something. I can't seem to sit and talk at the same time. Although so my name is David Paulson. I'm in the journalism program. I'm in the environmental journalism program, which is really specific. And even though I've been at Michigan State for about 10 years now, I still find myself shocked to be here. I was a journalist for 22 years, and we're glad to be coming back to my alma mater to teach journalism. But I have always had a strong interest in science and environmental reporting. I was just talking at the beginning of this session that I can remember, I think one of my first really heavy-duty science research stories was reporting on the superconducting super collider when I was a student here and writing that story for the state news and being extremely frustrated with how difficult it was to translate that information. But it's funny, it's a clip I've hung on to for a long time, and I always go back and I read it and I show it to my students. And how would you do this differently, and how would you do it better? I kind of cringe every time I look at it, but I think it's a good reminder. And hopefully it got a little better since then. I don't want to talk so much about digital storytelling, although we're certainly going to get to that. I want to talk about just storytelling in general. And maybe start with a little story about my visit to probably one of my most favorite places in Lansing, over on the west side, Horrocks Market. In particular, the craft beer section.
Yes.
That's
maybe
one great. It's great. It's great. To tell you the truth, my shop where I get the coffee, I don't get the beer. I want to be able to pick my beer with a silver mind, I guess. And I was looking around, and what I was looking for was my favorite beer. Okay, Founder's Breakfast Stout. Anybody a fan? Yeah, it's really good stuff. Okay. And a young woman who is obviously very knowledgeable about beer came up to me and said, "Can I help you?" I said, "No, I know exactly what I want. Just go away, leave me alone." And I said, "No, wait a minute. You can help me. Every time I come in here, I look for Founder's Breakfast Stout, and I might have experience some other beers and not be so one track. Can you help me select a beer that would be for a person who likes Founder's Breakfast Stout?" And she said, "Sure, absolutely. I think what you ought to do is look at the Dark Horse holiday series of stouts. There's 5 different ones, and there's 1 oatmeal stout and 2 something else and 3 sour stout. And it goes all the way to 5, which is Plead the Fifth." And she's telling me the story about how, and everybody looks forward to it. As the winter goes on, it gets a little stoutier and stoutier, and everybody looks forward to the next release, and this goes through, year after year. We do this, and everybody looks forward to it. And I said, that's kind of a neat thing. And so I said, so I'll take a 4 of that number 1 oatmeal stout. And so I bought it, and I went home, and I opened the bottle, and I thought, well, this is good beer, but it's not Founder's Breakfast Stout. And I thought, why in the heck did I buy this beer? And I got thinking about it. I didn't buy the beer. Okay, I bought the story. All right, and that story has value. Okay, it was worth the transaction, the human transaction that I had with that person. It gave me a little story to tell, to a group of people who were wondering, I came here for digital storytelling. Okay. But storytelling is important for more than just selling beer. Okay, and in fact, I made a career out of storytelling to sell research, and I know it's very, very hard to do this because I used to have to go to an editor and say, "I found out the scientists do this great thing. This is really, really exciting." And you roll his eyes, "Why am I wasting space on that?" Okay. So I had to come up with the techniques of telling the story to sell him on the story before I could, get the space in the paper to tell that story. And it's a struggle. It's still a struggle for me today. But hopefully I'm a little better at it. The anecdote that I remember online probably best is I can remember I had a writing fellowship at a NSF science research station in the Arctic. I was up there for 3 weeks working with the scientists and doing a lot of different things. And I can remember interviewing this one fellow, And he was describing his research. He says, you know, I think the answer could be this, or the answer could be that, or maybe this is going on. I said, so when do you think you're going to know this answer? He says, 5 to 10 years, something like that. And I just, oh. He says, well, what's the matter? And I said, well, you know, my readers just, they want to know the answer. Okay, they want to cut through all this stuff, and they want the answer, and that's where I really want to start. He says, well, I don't mean to tell you how to do your job. I think you got this all wrong. He says, I think you should tell stories the way I do science. He says, think that science is the greatest mystery story ever out there, and write about the pursuit of that mystery, okay? And leave a cliffhanger. Maybe it doesn't have a satisfying resolution. Stay tuned for a year from now when I pick it up and do it again. And so that kind of got me thinking a little more about addressing the issues of science in the context of real storytelling kinds of things. And so what has changed since then is it's not enough to teach people like me to tell the research story or the science story for a number of reasons. One is there's fewer of us. There's been a significant recalculating of the communication landscape. What that means is that the responsibility for telling that story is falling to a whole bunch of other kinds of folks with some really interesting and great things and some concerning things as well. But I would argue that it also means that scientists and researchers need to help tell that story. If nothing more than help telling the story to another storyteller who's going to take it a step further, but also more directly impacting the public and the audience. And that audience could range anywhere from a grant maker who's trying to decide whether or not they want to support your research to the public who wants to decide whether or not to support your research, either economically or politically or whatever. My daughter has got an internship right now at the American Association of Universities, and her job is right now is to explain why Research One universities should exist and what the world would look like if we didn't have them, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing for AAU to be doing in some real creative ways. So that's why I'm real interested. I'm working on the other side of the fence. My center does a lot of training of journalists and obviously graduate and undergraduate students. But probably in the last 5 years, some of the more heavier stuff we've been doing is working with scientists. First, to kind of help mediate that relationship between scientists and researchers and in the media and other storytellers, but also to help them do a better job of telling their story. That's not simply a matter of helping them do a better job of telling their story. Sometimes it's a matter of convincing them that they should. And a lot of people aren't interested in it, and I can understand that. You know, I'm just a scientist. I got into this because I want to do science, you know, and I'm really into this. And somebody else handled this communication for me. That makes a lot of sense, and I can understand it. Still, I would say that, you know, communication is increasingly prized. We can certainly see it in terms of research grant proposals that ask for those broader impacts of the research, you know, that you're going to develop. There seems to be an increasing demand for that. And then there's some institutional challenges as well, because a scientist or researcher would argue that, well, they don't want to get rewarded for doing it. They get rewarded for publishing in academic journals, and that's real important. And what that communication component is not equally valued, even though it's extremely difficult, and researchers who do it well are certainly highly valued. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Why don't I turn it over to Rashad to talk a little bit about what we've been doing, and then I'll slip back in with another research.
I'm used to pacing. Well, I feel a little trapped because of the wires here, but yeah. So I think Dave pretty much spoke to why it's important. So from there, I just want to talk a little bit about what we've done and what our approach has been to kind of getting this message out. So we created a workshop. And we had a pilot group comprised of several groups, Be Heard scholars, translational scholars, some members of GCFSI. And essentially, the first half of the, I guess the first goal of the workshop was basically what David just described, the characteristics of a good story, how to pull out these elements, and also how to be cognizant of jargon that you may be using based on your area of research that might not be commonly known. The other component, which I focused on, was how to use multimedia assets to enhance that story. So whether it be photos, video, using audio either as a soundtrack or to create a certain feel of the video. And then the last part is getting out of our own way. You know, oftentimes people find themselves having to tell this story in different formats because just the lack of knowledge, not having gone to school to study video production and so on and so forth. It's just things that we do because we just don't know any better. You know, so some of those techniques, if you will, or tips are some of the things that we try to incorporate into the workshop and ultimately into a course that we developed, an online course. So that's kind of where the lay of the land here. So just to talk a little bit more about the workshop, I already mentioned these groups of people that attended that. We kind of started out that day with an assignment. Those people who we invited, we asked them to come to the workshop prepared to tell their story of their research in, what do we give them, like 2 to 3 minutes worth? Something like that. So we wanted them to do that without having any prompt or any kind of guidance, just so we can get a baseline of where things were in terms of their ability to tell that story. So we did that in a group, and we allowed people to kind of comment and kind of express the things that resonated with them, because oftentimes the audience wasn't familiar with the research topic either. So that was really beneficial, and then Dave told a story that we're going to get into.
Yeah, we're right now.
I'll just lay this out and move on to that. And then Dave will walk through an example, a very popular example of how research storytelling can really enhance the reason why the research is important. We also had Stephen Thomas and Julie Barkin, do a presentation based on the project they're working on and how improving, making images and graphs more clearly illustrated can help improve that message and improve the communication of something that you're trying to get across. And then lastly, on the second day, it was a 2-day workshop, we actually invited them to bring in pictures that they had and help them find other pictures that they could kind of produce a visual representation of their story. Right? So that's kind of the lay of the land, and I'll get more into that. Why don't you go into the...
Okay, can you fire up the walls?
Yeah.
So just a couple of follow-ups. So the way researchers communicate and the way storytellers communicate, no surprise to anyone, are pretty different. There's some real basic differences, and they're really easy to point out. So if you look at a research study, it almost always starts out with background, okay, and context. And a scientist would say that's laying the groundwork for what we're explaining, and a storyteller would say that's burying your lead. Okay, it's important. Okay, it should be used somewhere in the story, but don't put up this huge roadblock before you even get in there. You know what we want to know? 8 pages in, results. Okay, and that's where, well, how can you report the results without reporting the context? Well, the first thing you need to do is to grab eyeballs, to grab interest. Okay, we'll take care of that context. You know, it's going to be in the story, but I got to get you interested in the story. And so, like what I tell my students, there's only one person in this world who's paid to read what you write, and that's me, okay? Everybody else, you got to write a story that demands to be read. Okay? So it's just not enough just to lay that out there. So it's kind of interesting to see researchers kind of grapple with that. It's also interesting to see journalists who usually are typically really hard pressed for time and have to decide really quickly if a story or not, convince them, no, you need to go 10 pages into the study and look for their little results and decide whether might be on the story there or not. So kind of a clash of two cultures. The other thing is like simplification kinds of issues as well. Scientists hate that. And that's why it was really interesting for us to bring in Steve and Julie, who were talking about the hockey stick curve. Are you familiar with that? So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has got this famous hockey stick. And what they do is they, to show climate change, and they actually market this to, this is for the general public. You know, this really helps you, understand what's going on. Okay, and so Steve and Julie did a test and showed people this graphic and then asked them to explain it or to perform some tasks on it. And I think something like 30% of the people who saw it were able to perform that task, to get this information out of it. I'm sorry I don't have a picture of it, but it's just like chock full of information. Okay, it's got all kinds of things going on in it. And then they redesigned the graphic. Okay, they greatly simplified it, and they had people do the same task again. And this time around, it was like 67% were able to perform the task. 67% still isn't great, folks, okay? But it's better than the 30-odd%. But what's interesting is it always elucidates a lot of interesting conversation between storytellers and scientists. And the storytellers say, see, they get it, it's clear, it's right out there, get rid of all that other stuff. And the scientists say, but it's more complicated than that. And when you take that information away, you're losing important context. And now, actually, that graphic isn't really accurate anymore because you've lost all the nuance. And then the pushback on that is well, was it accurate the first time around when nobody understood what the heck you were trying to communicate? There's a push-pull on it. There's an ethical dilemma there. It's really kind of a struggle. So one of the things that I do with my students in other contexts is I like to tell my favorite MSU research story. My guess is probably many of you already know what the story is. Okay, and it has to do with these birds here. These are robins. You can find these robins in Michigan State University Museum. You ask to see them. They'll take you in the back room. They're in a lower drawer in a cabinet. They'll pull them out and they'll show you these robins. These are world famous robins that had an impact on your lives. It's affected every single person in this room and elsewhere. They're really incredibly important. I'm going to tell you about why that is in just a little bit, but I want to move the story along a little bit. These robins were collected by a man by the name of George Wallace. And Rashad, if you go to the next slide. So this is George Wallace. He was an ornithologist here at Michigan State University. And the birds were collected in the late 1950s, early 1960s. Not so much by him, but by his students. Students would be walking to campus, and they would find dead robins along the side of the sidewalk. Okay, and they'd pick them up and they'd take them to their ornithology professor, and they'd say, hey, "What's up with this now?" And they would find them. They'd be shaking and they would be trembling, or else they would be dead. Wallace says, "I don't know what the heck's going on here." He says, "I'm an MSU ornithologist. I guess I ought to figure it out." So he began to do some investigations, some scientific research, and his first theory was that they were suffering from some neurological disease. Okay, but as he did his investigation, he found that was not the case at all. And so then he made one of these great intuitive scientific leaps. He began to wonder if the death of the birds were connected with the death of another organism at Michigan State University, which at that time were the Dutch elm trees. Okay, they were dying from Dutch elm disease, and this was a pest that had come over in, I guess, packing crates from Europe, and began to infest our trees, and they carried a fungus, and it very rapidly killed elm trees. Okay, and it was a tragedy at Michigan State University. Can you do the next slide? So this is very, very pixelated, but this is what elm trees were like. Okay, and they defined the character of communities across the United States and campuses like Michigan State University. And I don't know if we can even understand the depth of concern of the loss of these trees, but I've heard people describe them as giant green fireworks erupting upside down from the ground. Okay. And there was this real desperation to solve this problem. And so Wallace began to think that there might be a link because at that time we were nuking the campus pretty heavily with DDT. And now we think, well, duh. Okay. But it's not that simple. People who were students then, and we've interviewed since, talk about walking to class along the sidewalks of Michigan State University with a crunch, crunch, crunch of clay pellets loaded with DDT underneath their feet. These were clay pellets that were dropped from airplanes across East Lansing, across Michigan State University, okay? Because we got to kill the bugs, right? Now the problem is by the time you kill the bugs, it's too late. Okay, so we got to kill the bugs to save the trees. Okay, so Wallace says, I'll bet there might be a link here. I don't know why he thought that, but it was one of those fortunate things. The problem was you could spray the birds with the DDT, and they didn't particularly suffer from the same degree of death that he was noticing across campus. But eventually Wallace and several other scientists at the time too came to this really groundbreaking notion of bioaccumulation. Do we know what bioaccumulation is? Okay, remember our high school biology? For those of you who are nodding but really don't remember, let me just give you a quick example of how that might work in this particular example. Okay, we spray the trees with DDT and the leaves fall in the fall and they kind of land on the ground. And the leaves eventually rot, but the DDT, a little bit there, stays there. Next fall, a little more comes. Next fall, a little more comes. It begins to accumulate. Okay. Well, along comes a worm, and the worm's chewing his way through that leaf most. Picks up a little bit of DDT, doesn't really bother it at all. Okay. Then chews a little more, picks up a little more, okay, and it begins to accumulate. It gets more and more and more. He might never die, but he's got more DDT in his body than he ever would have otherwise. Well, you know what's going to happen next, right? The birds come along and they eat the worms, okay? And they might eat 3 worms, they might eat a dozen worms, they might eat 100 worms before they get ill. But eventually you've got birds trembling on the side of the sidewalks at Michigan State University because they've got this loaded DDT in them. So I don't know if we can really appreciate what a dramatic leap that was. What's the next slide? I think this is just a sprayer at MSU. This is a ground sprayer. Anybody have pictures of the bombers going over the MSU Drive?
That's a Spartan Village too.
Yeah, I think so. What's our next slide? Okay, that's good then. All right, so this was extremely controversial, especially at a university that does a lot of research on pesticides. Pesticide manufacturers were very, very angry and began pressuring officials at the university about, you need to get this guy in line here. I mean, for one thing, he's not a chemist, he's an ornithologist. What the heck does he know? And they actually held debates here at Michigan State University with the big chemical manufacturers who would come in and talk about, the wonderful things that pesticides are doing. And Wallace would be up there, and I interviewed a guy, who remembers seeing these things, and he said, well, he was such a dweeby guy. He'd sit there and he'd have his book, his lab book in front of him, and he said, well, if you turn on page 23, you can see, according to my chart, that, very, very poor communicator. Okay, it got so bad, there was so much pressure that John Dingle, everybody remember John Dingle? He didn't retire too long ago, last year or two. Okay.
He's still there, till January 31st.
Oh, is he? Okay, good.
But his wife just won.
Well, John Dingle, 1,000 years ago, actually jumped to his defense. And basically, I never really got this really verified, but the story goes, he said something along the lines to Michigan State University, if you ever want to see an agricultural appropriation again, lay off of Wallace. I don't know what's that, because it makes a good story, though. And Wallace survived. Yeah. So Wallace survived, and hey, that was great. That was great. So now what I want to do is tell you, I'm going to step out of my role as storyteller and step into my role of teaching you how to tell stories. Let's kind of dissect what I told you. I want to talk a little bit about some story hooks. So hit me the next one there. Okay, so the first thing I did is I showed you a picture, and I actually deliberately had that picture showing up there for a little while before it started because I wanted you to be thinking, what the heck are these rabbits about? Okay, so when you tell a story, photos are really important. They're so important that even crappy photos are far superior to no photos. And if you were, if you've got a good critical eye, you need a good critical eye. You can see that I ran 2 highly pixelated images, one of elm trees and one of George Wallace. Okay, I should probably really replace that in my slideshow. But I would say those highly pixelated images are far superior to no image at all. What's the next one? Okay, audience identification. I knew I was talking to people from Michigan State University. Okay, so, and real estate is local, 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 and communication is local, local, local. How to resonate with your audience. I know you're from MSU. I want you to get that MSU connection so you get it pretty far. What's the next one? Okay, word picture. I painted a word picture. Anybody remember what that word picture is?
The pellets walking. Crunch.
That's good. I've never had that answer before. That's not what I'm looking for, but that's fine.
I saw the worms.
You saw the worms? Okay. Anybody else?
Twitching birds.
Quivering birds. So far, we're striking out of the one that I'm looking for. But that's good, because we've got lots of images. Okay.
Wallace trying to tell the story and being very unique.
That's true, too. That works. Okay, so all those images are really, really important. The one that I was trying to get you to identify, and maybe I didn't deliver it as directly as I had in the past, is elm trees erupting from the ground like giant green fireworks upside down. And to tell you the truth, I heard somebody describe it that way probably 17, 18, 20 years ago. Stuck in my mind all that time. So I stole it. Okay, so I used that as well. Okay, what's our next one? Okay, so anecdotes, like you want to tell a little story within the story. So students walking to class crunching those clay pellets would be an anecdote. Birds trundling along the side would be a little story within the story. Try to give your reader a little bit of a reward. Telling you this big long thing, it's a research story. I want to give you a little bit of relief from these little stories as well. Okay, in conflict, is Wallace going to get fired? John Nimble ran to his rescue. Now, this is something that we use in journalism an awful lot. It's often the very first sentence, right? Okay. And there's some problems with that, and I grant you. But that whole conflict is just a really, really good storytelling technique. A story without conflict is difficult to tell. Not impossible, but you should always look for it. Look at that. And for the research story, it could simply be researchers that disagree with you. Or another element of that kind of research. Okay, and a cliffhanger. Does anybody remember the cliffhanger? Okay, so I tried to set the hook a little bit at the very beginning. These are very famous robins. They have a significant impact on your lives. Okay, and I'm going to tell you about it in a little bit. I haven't told you about it yet, have I? Okay, so now let's tell the rest of the story. What's the next slide here? Okay, anybody recognize this?
Rachel.
That's Rachel Carson, okay? And so she's a big deal in my neck of the woods because she's viewed as perhaps the first environmental journalist of a modern era, okay? And she's also responsible for, frankly, launching the modern environmental. Okay. And so the neat thing about Rachel Carson is, she wrote this book. What was the name of the book?
Silent Spring.
Silent Spring, okay? And before she wrote the book, she began corresponding with Wallace. And they wrote back and forth, and you can go to the MSU Museum and you can see this correspondence. You can see Wallace's originals. You can see his carbons of what he wrote to her, and you can see the originals of what she wrote back to him. And if you go to, I think it's Yale is where the Rachel Carson papers you can find the opposite over there. Yeah, very, very interesting. She's trying to understand this concept of bioaccumulation, his science that supports it. And it's really kind of funny stuff, too. I mean, it really shows the difference between the researcher and the communicator because she told him that she thought she's thinking about writing a book and she was thinking about calling it Silent Spring. Well, he thought that was a stupid name. Well, the spring's not silent. You can hear things. Other things are alive in the spring here. What a dumb name for a book. This goes back. Okay, so what's our next slide here? Okay, so there's Silent Spring. Okay, and you can find Wallace's research, and other people's research too. Okay, discuss there. These birds here that you're looking at, these are the silent birds of Silent Spring. Okay, and they had a significant impact on your lives because of really broad awareness of chemical threats to the environment. Anything else? Let's see what else we got here. Okay, so the scientist provides the ammunition to change the world. All right, nice one. But it was the communicator who was confused. So you need them both, okay? And it's nice if you can get both in the same person. It's difficult to do. I think maybe another side. Okay, so when you tell a story like that, there's a couple goals, okay? And it's a good thing to actually write them down as well. So I want to tell you the goal that I had when I told this story, the first one. Okay, the primary goal I had is I want you to know how biomagnification works. Typically, I tell this story to students who don't have much of a clue about biomagnification. I tell them, you'll never forget it again. You won't understand that concept. I taught you a scientific concept in a context of a story. And then the next goal, kind of a secondary goal, how does science work? And I only did this very minimally, but it was along the lines of when I told the story about, he figured this was a neurological disease, okay, and found out he was wrong. But I think it's important to tell that story because it gets across what science is all about. And that failure is not failure, it's another way of succeeding. That's what science is all about. Okay. And he said, well, that didn't work. And he found something else. And it's just, it's there a little bit, but, it's kind of a hook that I want to set in the mind of the viewer. And then I think I got one more slide with some, maybe hit it again. Okay, so when you're putting together your story, I always write a single sentence that elucidates that goal. You don't have to use it, but it keeps your mind on focus. Researchers have a great deal of trouble with this. They want to tell everything, and really what you want to do is you want to tell a piece of the story, an interesting piece of the story. You got more to tell? Save it for another story. Okay? It's a little hard to do, though. Describe the precise audience you want to reach. You would speak differently to policymakers, to other funders, to other scientists, the general public, and try to think of who you're telling that story. Try to visualize them directly. Okay, start with the most interesting aspect. It might not be the most important aspect. Start with the most interesting. Remember, you need eyeballs, you need attention before you can do some education. Why is the research important to people? Okay, be very, very specific. Sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes that's difficult. Particle physics is always a challenge with that. Okay, fundamental research, And it always kind of harkens back to, well, we didn't know we were going to invent Tang until we went to the moon, that type of thing. Those things don't really come out of it. But people are very, very important. So health is a really, really strong hot button too. Can you find a personal anecdote, something interesting that happened to you that will work as a little story within the big story? I told you about the time that I interviewed that scientist who told me that I had it all wrong. He didn't want to tell me how to do my job. He was going to tell me how to do my job. Okay, a little personal anecdote. Can you write an analogy, metaphor, or simile? Paint a picture with words similar to what I talked about, the elm trees. Look for elements of conflict. And then, is there a cliffhanger that you can maybe pound a couple times throughout your story to keep the reader, the listener, the member of the audience riveted? I've got to find out how this thing ends up. He keeps telling me that these birds are important to my life. How can that possibly be true? I'm not going to stand up and leave the room until I find out. That's the goal. I think that's probably where I've been with the Wallace story. I'm just a little curious, though, how many people in the room are well familiar with the Wallace and the robins and the birds? Yeah. It's a really good story, And to me, it has a real personal connection. My dad is a biology teacher, and he was an MSU graduate, and he had the original copy of Silent Spring. I remember as a little kid, showing me the George Wallace things. And I was just very, very proud of that connection. We should be proud of that connection too. It's a good story.
Okay, so basically that story and those tips were what our audience went through in the workshop. They kind of allowed us to give some examples on the elements that they needed to pull out of their own stories. So I guess the part that I come into this, again, is the areas of enhancing this. Actually, before I do this, so let me show you one of our stories that one of our participants did, and we have I guess the baseline story, and then which was day one, and then the second story which we captured at the beginning of day two. So this is Princess J. Frimpong.
Let's see how it comes out. So my research is about understanding water and nitrogen use efficiency in soil PGP systems in northern Ghana, and I'm trying to use the application of crop simulation models. So in northern Ghana, the rainfall pattern is usually modal, so it's like within 6 months there's rain and the other months there's no rain. So most of the time during the off season, farmers leave their field bare with no cover on it, and because it's expensive to establish cover crops. So that's the wealthy farmers who can afford to establish cover crops, which normally go for or something to put on the soil. And over the last 40 years, drought has been a major occurrence in the region, and due to that, there's a lot of soil erosion. So soil degradation is really happening, and farmers are being challenged with that. And the cost of fertilizer is very expensive. Even when farmers, the government usually subsidizes fertilizer for farmers, but it comes at a time where it is late for farmers to apply because they've already started the season and their crops are at a stage of growth that the fertilizer will really not have impact on the growth. So assessing fertilizer is very expensive. And within this climate change situation, we are planning on helping farmers have a system that will help them improve their soil fertility.
A video must have corrupted. Well, I think that's maybe enough to get the gist, I hope. I think Princess is a good communicator, but in terms of me and being a layperson, I really didn't know what she was talking about in terms of the actual value of the research and how there was some jargon there. She was speaking about PDP and
None of us know.
I imagine it was like a chickpea, and she mentioned legumes, and I know what that is, but my knowledge only translates that to mean bean, not exactly what is it, what is unique about a legume that makes it relevant. So hold on.
And on the positive side, though, was she was well prepared. She knew what her story was about, and she was passionate. You can't teach that. She was into it. You knew there was a story there somewhere.
You can see how she squared up at the camera. She was so the next day, going through the exercises and the discussion points that we had, we had them tell their story at the beginning of the day. So this is how.
So I have always worked on cut flowers, like working in the nursery, managing them. But right after my master's program, I had the opportunity to work with a team and the project was funded by the USAID. And it was in northern Ghana. We were looking at intensification of farming systems. So I got interested in working with food crops that for me, I think they have the ability to address some of the challenges farmers are facing, like food security, soil improvement, drought resistance, and all of that. So that's how I got interested in working with legumes. And in northern Ghana, the soil there is very low in organic matter, and it's because the predominant vegetation is mainly grass. So, like low fertility. And farmers always use the same piece of land. It's like every season they are cultivating the same land. So over the years, the land has lost its fertility. And drought has been a major occurrence in the region. So with this, it is important to have ways or means to address this persistent issue. And most farmers cannot access inorganic fertilizer, even though we know it is very important for their crop production because of cost. And intercropping is like having two crops on the same piece of land. So you have a legume which has the ability to provide nitrogen for another crop. So when I say legume, you can look at it like a cowpea. So you have cowpea and corn on the same piece of land. But most of the time, there's competition because two plants are growing together. But the crop I'm using is pigeon pea. And pigeon pea has a very initial slow growth. So by the time corn is growing, pigeon pea is really at very low stage. So it will not have any competition with corn. So corn will go to a certain height before pigeon pea will start growing. So this will reduce the competition that normally comes when you have two crops growing together. So the farmer is able to reduce that aspect of the problem. And pigeon pea as a legume has the ability to provide nitrogen for the corn that is growing. So in a way, it is helping corn to grow. So the farmer has what we call like yield stability. Like the farmer is getting corn and will get pigeon pea. So two crops on the same piece of land. And pigeon pea as a legume will provide variety in the diet of the farmer. So the farmer will have the corn and will have something that has protein. So malnutrition is being addressed. Then the soil problem of the farmer is being addressed too. So I think this is very important. It is worth pursuing because now things are changing with climate change. Farmers are no longer sure about the rainfall pattern. And if farmers can't be sure that this season is going to be good for them, then they need a crop that is resistant to drought. And pigeon pea has that ability. So it becomes an ideal crop to introduce to farmers in helping them to improve their soil fertility. So I have always worked on.
Okay. Now, did you notice a difference? What were some of the elements, I guess, even that Dave spoke about, that you saw in this story, or this version of the story?
She starts by telling you a problem that the farmers need to solve.
Right.
It can be sort of focuses what comes next.
She explained some of the jargonistic areas a little bit better. So if you didn't know what the different types of pigeon pea they were, you had a better context of what those were.
She also talks about how she got interested in it, which I think is always important. Because if you spend your life doing one thing, like a lot of scientists do, that's how did you get started in this? Why did that?
I really like that element. I think that's something that in any story, I think people are always looking for, why should I care? And when you put yourself in the story or put someone in that focal point, you give people a reason to care, even if they don't know you. People can relate to, finding your purpose or finding your passion. So yeah, I think that was a really nice element of what she did. And I think she's, oh yes sir.
Yeah, I think she also somewhat painted a word picture in terms of how these things grew structurally and physically. You kind of see the corn growing up and the legume, the pea coming in later and having a structure to grow on and complement the.
I think she did that really well. Like in terms of and listening to the first one, and even now, even though I know what this is now, when I listened to it the first time, all I'm hearing is the research. The second time with this story, I'm understanding why the research is I wanted to show that to kind of illustrate how some of these redirects or some of these interventions, if you will, can really enhance the story and really get you to focus on what is the goal that you're trying to achieve. And I think she really, you can see the improvement from one day to the next. So with that exercise, the second part of the second day, we also gave them homework assignment of bringing in some images, some photos, maybe from the research for those who had it. And also, we talked a little bit about Creative Commons. Is everyone familiar with that? Or just in case you're not, essentially Creative Commons is just a method of proactively giving people the right to use your copyrighted material, and also giving, I guess, the license for how they can use that material as well. So if you do searches for Creative Commons material or content, you can find images, videos, research, just about anything. So we also gave them some of the skills to find those things using those methods that will help enhance their story. We talked a little bit about the use of audio, and we also gave them some instruction on using a tool called WeVideo, which is an online free video editor that allows you to actually utilize Dropbox if you have one, or Google Drive or Flickr, or some of these online repository of images and things, and also gives you a cloud-based location to store your footage. So, with that, Princess actually made another iteration of her video using images. So this girl is really, what do you call it? Motivated, passionate. So yes. So she started this story, and then the following week she was like, I want to record my story over. So this is, we just initiate this. This is a little bit shorter, actually.
I have always loved working on cat flowers, but after my master's degree program, I had the opportunity to work with this team in Northern Ghana, and their project was basically looking at sustainable intensification of farming systems. And by working with them, I realized there was the need for farmers to improve their soil and increase crop production. Soils in the region are very low in organic matter, mainly because the dominant vegetation there is grass, and most farmers cannot access fertilizers due to cost. So most of the time, their yield is very low. And my main goal of this research is to help farmers improve their soil and increase crop production without necessarily having to buy fertilizers. And I'll be doing this by intercropping sorghum and pigeon pea. Intercropping is having two crops growing together on the same piece of land. We can see pigeon pea as peanuts. It is a legume that it has the ability to fix nitrogen into the soil, a very important nutrient for crop growth. And there's another characteristic about pigeon pea, which we call hydraulic potential. This is how it works. The crop has a very deep rooting system, so it is able to go deep down the soil profile and lift the available water to make it accessible to the surface of the soil. So crops that have shallow rooted are able to access that water. And for me, I think it is very important in exploiting this potential of the crop, because I will be working in a dry condition and crop production is mainly rain-fed. So I'm anticipating pigeon pea will help with the buildup of organic matter by dropping its leaves. It will help in improving the soil moisture and reduce competition for the crop that I'll be intercropping to grow. So it means we'll be having increased yield on the same piece of land that the farmer was using. And the results of this research will provide farmers with a more sustainable and affordable alternative options for increasing their production without having to worry about cost of buying fertilizers and others.
So she is not completely finished with that video, but I think really the value of that is not in producing Grammy Award winning video, but it's really just having I said Grammy Award. Oscar, there we go, thank you. But it's really having, I think, the lens of recognizing what things can help assist you in your storytelling, you know, and so I think she's on her way. She'll tighten up her production abilities with practice, but that's really what the goal of the workshop is. So the continuation of that is actually an online course that we actually piloted 2 weeks ago now, maybe. So ran a 2-week pilot of this course. It's called Plan, Produce, Share, Telling a Better Research Story. And what we try to do is replicate the experience that we did in our workshop online. So we had 44 people enrolled. Like I said, we just wrapped up with this, so we're still evaluating the things that the areas that we can improve and kind of better, I guess, scaffold the experience so that people have a better sense of where they're going through the course. But ultimately, I mean, I think we're off to a good start. A lot of the assets that David mentioned earlier, the Julie, the Stephen Thomas and Julie Barkin video, and actually his story and some others are also captured in the course as assets and teaching tools. So
one of the things we captured was scientists talking about the value of being able to do that. Scientists who are really good communicators on campus, making the pitch for why other scientists should do this as well. I really like the Princess series. I think you did a nice job of editing that together. I need her to do one more iteration.
Well, she edited that actually.
Yeah, no, but I meant you edited your presentation. But so what would you tell her to improve? The last one, any extensives? I would say she's got really good pictures and we don't see them long enough. And actually, I'd like to see more of the pictures to hear her speak rather than seeing her. That's a real easy thing to change, though, right? You know, that would be, and sometimes you don't even know that to put it out there to see. The other thing that I find really interesting about this is that, you know, I talked to some of my colleagues back in arts, and I said, you know, this guy Rashad showed me this thing called WeVideo, and they were like, oh, you know, that was like, you know, if you really want to do this right, you need to get Final Cuts, or you need to get this other software, and spend a lot of time, you know, learning how to do this to that. Well, you know what? No, you don't. Okay, if you want to write it, if you want to run the documentary, if you start to be a documentary filmmaker, sure, do that. But simple tools like this are extremely powerful, and everything doesn't have to be, you know, thoroughly polished. She had a couple other references in there that I caught just this time around. She said something, and I think this grew out of a conversation that Rashad and I had with her. She says, well, a pigeon pea is like a peanut. Because we told her, I said, you're talking to a U.S. audience. We don't know pigeon pea from. I said, what is it like? She said, well, it's a legume. And I said, well, to me, a legume is a bean. You know, what's a legume? She said, well, it's like a peanut. And there it is. Okay. So it was in there. And then she talked about the hydrological impact of this. And so she first said that, and she said, this is how it works. And you can almost hear the colon. This is how it works, colon. And now I'm simply going to tell you how it works. Very, very, and I tell you the thing that tickles me the most about how motivated she was. She really wanted to tell this story. And that's encouraging because, frankly, I come across too many researchers who go the other way. It's not my job. I'm not interested in it. This is why I got involved. But again, I tell you, I can understand that. Everybody can't be here.
Thank you for bringing it back to her story. Another thing that I think, just as the same characteristics that you discussed in telling the story verbally, I mean, I think you still have the same considerations visually as well. Like some of the images, and this is some of the feedback I gave her, they didn't add to the story, but the practice images that she had, so being more intentional with the ones that do illustrate the story, spend a little bit more time on. I think definitely small, minor tweaks that would enhance the story, but definitely a good start.
But along that same line too, I think it's important, if we can reach researchers with this kind of education so that they know that, geez, they ought to snap a couple of images while I'm out with people doing this thing. I can use this someday, and then 8 months later, I have to do a presentation about my work. I wish I had something, taken something. We can get that intentionality involved in this knowledge of, as you are living the story, you ought to record it. Makes your life a little easier.
Did you have a comment?
I think so. So I think in the background of everything you're about saying, there's also something else that you are putting forth, but it's not being articulated. Which reminds me, there's a story called 10 Blind Mice, which is, I think, a Chinese folk tale. And one by one, each of the mice go out. And one comes back and says, whatever that is, it's like a spear. The other one says, nah, I went out before you, it's like a rope. And they go back. And 9 of them come back with different descriptions, and the 10th one goes out and says, well, it is like a spear in one part, and a rope in another, and a rug in another, but all in all, it's an elephant. And so seeing those things like anecdote, punchline, and all of that, and also through your iterations, what really is coming through to me also is like, at some point there has to be an answer to the question, when is story? It's like, coming a different way I thought about this, coming from photography, there's this, depending on how you think about it, could be a game, could be a learning technique, it's called a 6-word story. Usually they use a story by Hemingway as an illustration of what a 6-word story, which is for sale, children's clothes, never used. That's a 6-word story, which raises the question then, how much do you need to tell the story? And like seeing all your examples, I was constantly thinking like one of the things that they're doing is sort of tweaking the answers to when is the story there, the way they want it to be. And so like having those images, so I guess what I'm getting at is I think there's some concept of a whole that unifies all these parts somehow. I don't know if you call it a whole or a structure or what. But I'm wondering how you can teach people that. Because when I'm working with people on stories, one of the problems they have is trying to decide what to leave in or what to leave out.
I think it matters who your audience is, what your goal is, what you're trying to achieve. So for a lay audience, like me, for example, seeing images, I think is extremely beneficial. Having that story, having that lead-in of how she got interested, even though it doesn't do much in terms of expanding my scientific knowledge, it interests me, where maybe scientists might just be interested just by hearing the development. So I think that one of the things that we talked about in the workshop is you may have multiple stories So it's also it's also about understanding what story you need to tell.
But the image, if it was the wrong image, it could blow the whole story. I mean, every image is not worth 1,000 words.
Right.
Some of them aren't worth a single word. So like, what's really important is that the image enables the story. Because I could supply hundreds of images. It would be a complete wild goose chase. And so the choice of images is really good because it amplifies the story.
I think it's a real difficult concept to teach, and I think you have to do it wrong for a while before you start figuring out that you're doing it right. I tell my students the same thing. The hardest thing about telling a story is to decide what to leave out. And it's really hard. You know what? It's really hard for researchers. They want to be, you haven't told the full story yet because, well, no, we're telling the story. And that's a challenging thing. And I think that's a level of sophistication that takes a little while to get to. But it's an important level.
I just look at the differences between her first iteration on the first day and what she did.
Practice.
Right. I mean, just so in a matter of, I don't know when she did the third one, it looks like maybe that was also the second day, or did she come
like a week later.
Oh, so a week later. So, in a balance of, 7 to 10 days, I feel like having watched the third iteration, I can actually tell someone about this. Again, not be able to explain it scientifically, not be able to do all those things, but that's not the point. After the first one, I would have just stood there and went, I have no idea what you're talking about. I couldn't explain this to anyone. I couldn't support your cause. I couldn't get passionate about it because I didn't understand it. The third one, okay, I get it. I understand now what's happening. There are probably 3 or 4 main points in there. I now understand what those are. I get the terminology. I get the concept. I could get behind that for whatever value there is to me being behind that, but at least I could do that. I mean, that's pretty remarkable.
I think it is, like David said, it's something that you develop a skill for over time. And I think this process helps you to have that lens, if you will, for recognizing the things or the elements that you need to tell your story. So that when you go back into the field that you're thinking about, I should get some shots of the environment so that people can understand the need for whatever. Or you think about, getting those close-up shots of the pigeon pea growing and that relationship between that symbiotic relationship between corn or something like that. I think once you have that understanding, it helps you understand what you need to include to tell a story.
Images have connotations too, and I think you have to be careful about that. An example would be in there where you showed the sprinkler just to show water, the need for water. Now, in my world, that kind of sprinkler is an anti-environmental thing. You put them out there and they use the water to keep the grass. But I would have much rather seen something. She was explaining so well the fact that the legumes have this deep root structure with a lot of ability to attract water, whereas the corn has a shallow root structure, and that's what's really making it work. I would love to see like one of the plants, and I don't know if you've seen legumes, root structures are very long and very interesting to look at, how they work, and how just the one even would have helped me understand that part of the root structure, and that whole concept would come together, whereas the connotations I have with that kind of sprinkler are not positive and don't relate to droughts. Where would you have a sprinkler like that in a drought area? And I don't mean that's bad. I was just going to say connotations are an important piece of how people feel about what you're saying too, and thinking that through.
I agree 100%. I mean, I think, like David said, it's getting it wrong. I mean, you have to get it wrong before you get it right.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But that was some of the feedback I gave to her. Like when the sprinkler came up, I didn't know what it related to, So this was her first iteration of working with images, So just as that first example of the story was rough and needed to be adjusted, I think just with a little guidance on why you want to keep this image up a little longer or why you don't even need this image, I think with that, she can fine-tune that story and make it even better. But I agree.
I didn't mean to be critical of what she did, but there's a lot of thinking through those images and thinking what will be one that will really make a point, and also thinking through connotations and things that look like you might use them would be interesting.
No, that's fine. That's why I showed it, because I knew it wasn't polished. And
very good.
But it's still very good, but there's some things that can be improved.
Actually, this is going off in a slightly different direction, but at the beginning, when you were talking about how do you get people interested in the story, I thought that there might actually be two different kinds of stories or storytellers. At least in my own experience, I've had the opportunity, for instance, to hear some researchers. One that comes to mind is a person named Heinz von Forster, who was a neurophysiologist who ran the biological computer laboratory at the University of Illinois. And at the time, I was a graduate student in music, so 3 2-hour lectures on neurophysiology weren't exactly what I saw as directly related to my career development. And I sat on the edge of my seat for those whole 2 hours. And I found out after his lectures that during the war, he actually worked as a magician in Austria. And so I thought that in a way, probably that performance experience had formed the way he talked about neurophysiology, because it was like you said, a mystery story. So to me, that's one kind of story where I heard it and I was completely blown away, and I remember his stories, but I could never tell them the way he told them. There are other stories that I hear and I'm like, I could tell that, and I'm going to remember that and use that, like you were saying about some of the stories that you appropriated from other people. So I wonder if there aren't stories that are distinctive and powerful because we can't tell them, and others that are distinctive and powerful because we can, and we actually use them. And I'm just curious if you think that that's a possible distinction or a working distinction worthwhile.
I think this is kind of nice because it's where I probably am and a lot of people, and we see her come from that position. So I think, depending on what stage your audience is in, obviously there's different presentation. But I was wondering, are you going to talk about, is the course still open for January 12th, or how does that work?
Right. Thank you. The course, we're going to, so the pilot is officially closed, but we're going to reopen the course on January 12th for other people to sign up and participate. So we're still kind of evaluating and kicking the tires and trying to see the things we want to change for that January.
Is that all over the web, entirely over the web?
Yep. And this is the URL here, so it's msux.edcast.com. Actually, we have some small handbills with the URL on it. I'll be sure to get some for you all.
It's been an interesting experience for me because I'm not a MOOC kind of guy. I'm trying to get there. And in the master part was challenging in terms of teaching a skill like writing, because you really need that. I tried this. What do you think? Well, I think it would work better if you did this. Try that again. That kind of interaction. And so that's why, over at the School of Journalism, our courses are confined to 18 students. And so to translate that over to the MOOC experience is interesting. And I think the way you do that is if you can begin to get students to post work that other students can comment, will help them develop that. But to me, teaching writing has always been a highly personalized and individualized skill. And to reach, this kind of audience, this kind of research audience that way, I think it's a challenge, but I don't think it's impossible. I think it's something, really worth exploring. Pushing forward.
Rashad, what was the makeup of the 44 people that were in the pilot? Could you talk a little bit about them? I'm just kind of curious, maybe what some of their motivations might have been, or what they produced, or what we learned from that, perhaps. Were they all MSU people, or were they all around the globe, or?
Yeah, primarily MSU people. There were a few people. I would say most people came from the groups that we mentioned, like in the pilot. So Be Heard scholars, translational scholars, you see on the side. Some friends that we invited that from like ag share projects we worked on. So people from Southern Africa, Southern East Africa. But I would say that one of the things that we learned from the experience, mostly I think, is that we need to better scaffold the experience so that people understand. Because I think the first part, translating the story, resonated with people. People showed up for that purpose. But some of the other things that we did in terms of visualizing that or creating the story in a visual format and audio format in terms of exercises, people didn't really understand that from the beginning that this is where this was going to go. That was some of the feedback that I heard. So, that's something I think that we just need to better establish up front, and maybe give some examples, like even like the one you saw, of how your story can evolve over time and how you can add different elements to help people see the journey. And not that you always have to do this for every story, but just having these skills so that when it applies, you know how to do it.
We did some interesting things, like we took we find a study that a journalist wrote a story about, and we give the study to the students. And this was just simply as an exercise, and it wasn't graded, so I really don't know how many people really did it. But he said, here's a study, and it's about boa constrictors in the Everglades that have this unique ability to, you can take them far away and they can find their way home, like birds, okay? And so we said, okay, read the study and write a story. And then we showed them the story that showed up in I think it was the Miami Herald, that was written about that. So they could compare what they did to what this professional writer did. And then we had an audio interview with the writer. Why did you decide to do it this way? Why did you do that? And I don't know. I mean, is that a teaching exercise? Is that going to work? And I hope it is. But I think what it takes is frankly a motivated student to follow through to do that. And then one of the things, I was thinking what we should do is, I could very easily come up with a whole, 8, 10 examples of that. Here's a study, here's a story, here's a study, here's a story. And you know what? It doesn't even have to be a good story, because I think that prompts, that was a lousy way of articulating that, or it's wrong. That person really twisted the science. I'd like to see some of that discussion going as well. And how you encourage that in this MOOC-like environment.
That's the biggest challenge there. The thing that makes it develop and work is that it's a group thing. You get feedback from people who are also volunteering their own work, and there's some camaraderie there. So that we're working on that.
But I was wondering about using models. Like when you said that, it reminded me. I saw one. I think it came from National Geographic. There was about a 30-second video clip of a fox jumping up in the air and coming down. Actually, I don't even remember if it was a fox, but it says the title was something like magnetism. And I thought, what does this have to do with magnetism? And so I had to read that thing to find out why on earth this fox diving on its nose into the snow had to do with magnetism. And I wasn't even interested or looking for it, but it was so compelling. I just had to go to it. And it turned out it had to do with some animals. I don't know what the boas do, but they think that they have a sense of where the Earth's magnetism is, and that's how they find animals beneath the snow. And I wasn't looking for it. It didn't have anything, but you talk about a compelling sort of hook, or whatever you want to call it. So I wonder if having a couple of things like that wouldn't help.
I'll just elaborate on that. So How would you apply that concept to this?
Well, the first thing I thought of was similar to what you said. Like, if you gave that to 10 people and said, okay, what could you do with this? Suppose this was your hook. What's it going to hook to?
Thanks.
But see, now another thing that I find interesting about that, it would be nice if you had a student in your MOOC who brought that to the table. Hey, I saw this box.
That would be even greater. Yeah.
So really kind of thought it was neat when you talked about visualizing, talking to your audience, having a dialogue with them. And I think that's something that sometimes scientists, I feel bad about myself sometimes, doesn't really do is think about the person on the other side of the conversation and that. So recently I heard a presentation from the Center for Story-Based Strategy, and they said that the real currency of narrative is meaning, not truth. So what is it that is meaningful to people that you are talking to? So why is this research meaningful to them, or why do you think it is meaningful to them? I think that's real important. That was part of your why and part of your dialogue piece. I thought it was real good.
Well, Jerry, do you think you could grab some of those little handbills?
Yeah, let me see if I can find some of those.
I think we have some tips. Do you want to have anything else?
I was just wondering, there was a class that makes videos, and the students do that, and we had them come in and develop something for our institute. And, the students working together and learning it. And I guess I was trying to relate this too, because we have extension and outreach, and we have a lot of, the researchers are critical, but also are there some ways students could work together to have more of a cadre of people better explaining things?
Well, it's funny you should raise that, because we're trying to advance this concept of, well, and I'm sorry, but I just hate the phrase, translational scholars. It's a phrase that needs translating itself. And what's interesting is whenever you get this discussion is, well, should we take communicators and train them up on science so they can better explain that? Or should we take scientists and help them explain their science better? And I've kind of been coming to the conclusion of, oh, I don't know, let's try both and see what works. And sometimes what works better than the other. So I'm involved with the Global Center for Food System Innovation. We have this translational scholar corps that we're trying to develop. And so I'm hiring students, half of them are from food sciences and half of them are from communications. We throw them together in the newsroom situation and developing ways of explaining the science, the food system science that's going on campus as well. Parallel to that, we're also trying to build in capacity into food researchers as well so that they can tell their story themselves. But we do have this group, which basically is working it as a SWAT team. You're going to go in here and you're going to find out what the scientist is researching, and you find the best way to tell that story. And that ranges from some where we're starting with is kind of like podcasts, which are kind of a stalking horse for, you got a good story out there or not? Let's talk to Joe Schmo. What are you doing? Okay, we're interviewing you. We'll capture it, put it on the web, some of it's going on WKR on current state. And then we'll say, wow, that guy's got a pretty good story. We could probably do something more with that. Okay, so let's send out a video crew. Let's send out some people to take some images. The thing that's got me interested, frankly, are these, anybody ever use magazine apps on your iPad, like Time Magazine or the New York or something like that? When you download those things, they're extremely interactive. There's all kinds of different additional things that you can do, ranging from listening to someone read the story to you, to additional ways of graphically representing things in a way that you can't do in a paper magazine. Well, I'm wondering, can we take the research, a piece of research, and give that same kind of, frankly, it's a little bit of glitz, okay? But I think it's also a lot of substance as well, too, to do additional stuff. So there's a lot of food work going on right now at Michigan State and Malawi. Well, let's find one researcher doing interesting things in Malawi and put that there. Well, then we stumble over another one. Well, he's doing something interesting too. And the common thread, and maybe it's Malawi, maybe it's gender studies, maybe it's something else. And then you add to it. Okay, now it's a little, well, actually you're kind of building up, I don't know, interactive textbook. I don't know if that's what I'm talking about. It's not quite a magazine. It's quite a, yeah, but there's an entertainment value to it. There's a communication value to it. But the neat thing is that you can keep adding to it, and you can replace it. By the way, the scientist who was doing the research on our first little segment that we might have done, a year later, probably answered, well, hey, let's update that, and it's ready to go. I don't know if that works or not, but I'm kind of interested in exploring that. Digital technology, storytelling technology is really exciting stuff. I wish it was good at it. I wish it was better at it. I hate to say it, but often my role is, hey, student, come over here. Look what they did over there. Could we do the same thing? Yeah, Mr. Paulson, I think we could. Well, show me how.
I want to be mindful of time because we are at the 3:30 marker. So if you do need to move on to your next event or activity, please feel free to do that. These gentlemen will be around if you'd like to stick around and ask any more questions or carry on any more conversations. And again, thank you. I hope to see you back here on Monday, December 8th.